Now we're going to look at multiplying imaginary numbers together. And one thing that we need to keep in mind is that I is equal to the square root of -1. If that's true, if I was to square both sides, so I squared and square root of -1 squared, then that's going to mean that I squared is equal to -1. Because if we take the square root of -1 and square it, remember that square roots and squares cancel each other, so I'm just left with a -1. So this is going to be important as we start multiplying. I'm going to go ahead and put a cloud around that and also highlight it. So that's how important it is to remember. Let's go ahead and look at our first example. The first method that I'm going to show you is multiplying by distributing. And that's one method of multiplying. I will show you box method on the next problem, so you can choose which method you like and then just stick with that method. So if we do multiplying by distributing, remember that we multiply the first parts together, the first part of each parentheses, and then we multiply the front and back, the outside pieces together. Then we move to the second, and we multiply those inside pieces together, and then finally the last part of each parentheses together. So I have 4 arrows. I'm expecting to have 4 terms in my multiplied expression. So if I take -1 and multiply by 15, that gives me -15. If I take -1 and multiply by -I, that's going to give me a positive I. 9I times 15 is going to give me 135I. And then 9I times -I is going to give me -9I squared. All right, so now we need to simplify. The first thing that I see that I can do is I have a couple of like terms that I can combine together. I can combine the I and the 135I, and that will simplify my expression a little bit and leave me with -15 plus 136I, 1 plus 135, and then -9 times I squared. Now, this does not look like standard form of a complex number because a standard form of a complex number doesn't have an I squared. But we learned something up here. We learned that I squared is equal to -1. So what I'm going to do in this expression is I'm going to take this I squared and I'm going to say that that is equal to -1. So if that's equal to -1, I can rewrite my problem as -15 plus 136I minus 9 times -1, because I squared is equal to -1. And now I can continue simplifying. I have -15 plus 136I. -9 times -1 is a positive 9. And now I have some like terms that I can combine one more time. Remember that standard form says that we need to write the real part first, the part without the I. So -15 plus 9 is a -6, and then we have 136I. This is in standard form, the A plus BI form. For this next method, I'm going to show you multiplying using the box method. And so once I show you that method, I want you to pick one of the two methods to continue using from here on out. Either multiply by distributing or multiply by the box method. You can use either one on any multiplying problem. So let's take a look at box method of multiplying. Your Algebra 1 teacher might have called this Punnett square method because it kind of is similar to a technique that you use in biology. So we have two things that we want to multiply together, and each of those two things has two terms. So we are going to draw a box and give ourselves a 2 by 2 box. This is kind of the opposite of what we did when we were doing factoring back earlier in this chapter. Instead of having things on the inside and writing things on the outside, we're going to do the opposite. So I have a 13 and an I, that's this expression right here, and then I have a 13 and a minus I, and that is this expression right here. It doesn't matter which one you put where, just pick a side, either the left or the top, and put each expression along one of those two sides. Now we just want to go ahead and fill in the boxes by multiplying. So I'm going to take 13 and multiply by 13 and put my answer right here in this box where they intersect. That's going to be 169. 13 times negative I is negative 13I. 13 times I, here and here, the answer goes in this box, and it is a 13I. And then finally, I times negative I gives me negative I squared. Now, I want to go ahead and write these terms out. 169 minus 13I plus 13I minus I squared. Now I notice that I have a negative 13I and a positive 13I, and so those are going to simplify, and in fact they cancel because they're opposites of each other. So I'm left with 169 minus I squared. But we remember that I squared is equal to negative 1. So I want to replace I squared in this expression with negative 1. So let's look at that. I'm going to have 169 minus a negative 1. So that is going to give me a final answer of 170, because minus a negative 1 is, or multiplying those together gives me a positive 1. And so I have a positive 1 to add to my 169.